Hello everyone, my name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 19.20 of our Western...
Hold it right there, partner.
Holy jeez!
Nope, sir. You stay, you stay.
Yeah, okay,
right
sure. You got it, man.
Now, is this the location of where the podcast Comic Book Breakdown is recorded?
Yeah, that's me. I'm Ben. Were you a fan of the Eternals? I'm sorry, really, but that comic just wasn't...
Do I look like I'm a fan of the Eternals? Please. I come in here dressed like this, sporting a lovely pair of Colts, and you think I'm here because you didn't like the Eternals? No, sir.
Okay.
I'm here because of your streak of Western episodes. Now, I got some questions for you, Mr. Podcast Man. So I'm just gonna grab... Alright, we gotta... Alright, nope, don't you move. Don't you move, alright? I'm just gonna sit here in this unfolding bowl-shaped chair. And now I ain't leaving until I'm satisfied.
Well, you could have just sent me an email, but I guess this is fun and dangerous. So you know me, I'm Ben. Who are you?
Just call me Kid Wednesday.
Nice to meet you, Kid Wednesday. Yeah.
What?
So?
Oh, right. So, look here. You went into these episodes exploring what made people want Westerns, right? You were a big fan of cross-gen, and people were demanding a Western from them, and you wanted to know why. So you went looking for answers in 90s-era Marvel comics? Hell, some of the books you talked about were published after cross-gen died. It's not like they could have influenced the comic reading audience at the time. Why didn't you bother reading any other classic Westerns? You know, the kind of stuff that the people writing cross-gen comics might actually have read at some point in their childhoods.
Well, look, there's two real easy answers for that. Just let me get a little more comfortable. Don't worry, you're fine. The first is that they're expensive. You can find a good number of issues for the classic Marvel Westerns online, sure. My comic shop had about half, I think it was, of Kid Colt and the Rawhide Kid's first volumes. But, we're also talking like $10 an issue for those comics. Kid Colt's ongoing series ran for like 250 issues. Rawhide Kid ran for, I think it was 150 or something like that. And if they're $10 each there, they're going to cost me even more on eBay to finish those collections out, plus shipping, and that's just too expensive for my tastes. I did see that they had the 7 original issues of Gunhawks on my comic shop, but again, that would still work out to be like $70 an issue, and I don't want to pay that much money for 7 comics. That leads me into my second reason why I didn't buy any of those Silver Age books, and it's because honestly, I don't like them very much. I do own a couple of digital collections of Silver Age Marvel comics from a couple different series, and at least one of them is the Rawhide Kid, actually. But the storytelling in them is just... man, it's so old. Like, we read some Silver Age stories that were reprinted in the Mighty Marvel Western one-shots, and those stories were fine, but they certainly weren't great. They weren't amazing. They didn't inspire me to walk away from those comics thinking that I needed to buy more of them. They were all very straightforward, and they were uncomplicated, and for someone who grew up reading more modern comics and books and TV shows and that kind of thing, they're just... I hate to say it, but they're boring. And I'm willing to spend a lot of money on comic books. Like, I believe me, I am, like a stupid amount of money. But I don't want to spend a stupid amount of money on boring comic books. It's one thing to buy something new that I've never read before and I have no context of, and I just want to see what this thing is. Like, that's a risk I'm generally willing to take with my cash. It's another thing, though, to buy something that I am confident is going to be both expensive and boring.
Well, I suppose I can understand that. But what about other modern westerns that you skipped? Like Ghost Rider Trail of Tears, or 1872, or Red Wolf? Those books are all relatively new, they're fairly inexpensive, and they're all westerns. Hell, 1872 was an Old West reimagining of the Marvel Universe. And yet you're stopping before even touching on those comics. What's going on there, Mr. Podcast Man?
I did bring up Trail of Tears, actually, and like I said there, that story is more of a Ghost Rider comic than it is a Western comic. Like, if I was going to do a Ghost Rider series of episodes, that's when I would cover Trail of Tears. Or maybe, like, around Halloween or something like that. That could actually be kind of fun. Trail of Tears was, 6-8 issues? That's like 3 to 4 episodes? That could be a fun, October miniseries. Oh, maybe. As for 1872 and Red Wolf, though, part of the reason that I left them alone is because they are absolutely tied together from a narrative perspective. 1872 leads into Red Wolf's ongoing series, so I couldn't cover one of them without also covering the other. But the trick with that is, one, I don't really enjoy 1872 very much, and two, I really enjoyed Red Wolf. Ever since I read Red Wolf, I've actually been considering talking about it on the show, because I think it's a really well-done book starring a very niche character who doesn't get a lot of spotlight, who's also an indigenous person for America, who again is completely an underrepresented group in American storytelling, especially in the mainstream at the very least. But the trade-off for that is Red Wolf's comic is super slow, so I get why no one cared about it at the time of publication, and then nothing ever really came of it. It ended, and Red Wolf went on to be an Occupy Avengers, and then Occupy Avengers ended, really quickly and very suddenly, and it didn't have any kind of real, wrap-up or emotional ending. Red Wolf's comic just ended up being a small footnote in 2015-era Marvel Comics. It's totally ignorable, and I feel bad saying that, but it's true. But with my desire to actually talk about that book, that would mean at least one episode for 1872 to give y'all the basic idea, and then 3 episodes exploring Red Wolf, so our 20 episodes of Western comics then becomes 24, 25, and honestly, at this point, I'm just ready to move on from the Western comics. This has been a fun era to explore, and I'm glad that we were able to jump around to a lot of different miniseries and meet a lot of different characters and learn some history, but I am more than ready to move on to something else. A man can't stay in the world of the American West forever, you know?
Except for a man of bravery and fortitude, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It takes a special kind of person to make that their style of living. Someone who is definitely not me.
Someone handsome and smart.
Uh-huh. So are you, from the Wild West? Are you a time traveler? Because if so, that is crazy.
Let's just keep our minds on the present, shall we? I do have a gun aimed at you. So you've read all these westerns. You've experienced what they're like. Did you find what you were looking for? Do you know why the people who were demanding that CrossGen publish westerns wanted westerns?
Honestly, I think I do, at least a little bit. There's a new western that just came out from Comixology. It's an original title to them, and it's by Scott Snyder with art by Dan Panosian. It's called Canary. And I've been sleeping on the Comixology original titles just because I prefer to have my comics exist physically in my hands on pieces of paper, not on a screen. I'll read a comic digitally if I have to, but I prefer not to. But, it's Scott Snyder, right? And he is a great writer. I've enjoyed everything that I've read by him. And in a recent interview with CBR, he talked a bit about why he chose to do a Western comic out of all types of comics that he could do. Snyder replied that he thinks that America uses Westerns to reflect what's going on at the moment. And I think that's really apt. Quote, "You've got the outlaw Josie Wales during Vietnam, the Wild Bunch during the nihilism of the 70s. It's the genre that almost demands you're reflecting things that are happening in one way or another," end quote. And I think he's right. Niceza's Two Gun and the Sunset Riders touched upon the importance of oil on the world stage, as well as using two of America's rival powers, the then waning threat of the Soviet Union and the rising power of the Japanese on the global tech stage, in order to frame its overall narrative. Ostrander's Blaze of Glory and Apache Skies reflect the post-9/11 world of comic book storytelling, a world where the bad guys can win, heroes can die, with a focus on storytelling and consequences. Then, later on in the 2000s, Zimmerman's Rawhide Kid Max series examines the place of homosexuals in the world of fiction, specifically American heroic fiction, just as the visibility of homosexuals was on the rise thanks to TV programming at the time. Westerns are a safe way for the American audience to process and digest the world around them while still feeling safe. It allows us to hang on to this imagined glorious past of myth-making and unreality, while still moving forward and examining what's happening today. It's this fascinating way of being both the past and the future in a lot of ways. Another one of the things that a lot of people just don't quite get about superhero comics is that there isn't just one kind of superhero comic. You can have the dark espionage flavors of Ed Brubaker's writing in Daredevil or Captain America, or you can have the more drama-oriented teen tales of Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man, or the bright, fun adventures of Dan Slott's Fantastic Four. There's all kinds of superhero stories, and the same can be said of westerns. Much like a superhero comic, a western can be many things. Look at the political drama of the Two Gun Kid and the Sunset Riders, or the more grounded, realistic stories about Blaze of Glory or Apache Skies, or the stranger, more Marvel-us, pun intended, stories of the mighty Marvel Western event. A western comic isn't one kind of comic. It's a setting. It's a vehicle for ideas. And I have to admit, stripping away the modernity of the present day for the dust and grime of the American West does add some interesting stakes to a story. After all, there are no cell phones to place phone calls or high-tech communication devices in order to call Captain America in when you run into a problem. Short of a few of our stranger tales, there are no superpowered gods like Thor that are coming to save the day. Like, somebody in the West has to stand on their own to a certain degree.
Or they have to rely on the help of others. We really didn't get that many solo stories in these comics, to be honest. Most of them are actually team-up stories. Blaze of Glory, Apache Skies, the Rawhide Kid miniseries, even solo one-shots like the Kid Colt one saw him team up with Mr. Hawk. Deadman Donnelly had his deputy.
Yeah, exactly. While I don't know how reflective these stories were of actual life in the West, they do indicate that a person shouldn't go it alone. We all need each other. We all rely on each other for help and for survival. And that's awesome. That's a great lesson. We're even shown that heroism has its costs in these stories, like with Blaze of Glory, and that reinforces the idea of how real these stories are. You read a modern-day superhero comic and someone dies, and you don't really care, Like, you care that the character died, but you care because of what comes next, not so much because that loss is permanent and everlasting. Doctor Strange just died a couple months ago, and now his ex-wife Clea has taken over his role, and she gets her own ongoing series, and that's what you cared about. That's why I am picking up the current volume of Strange. Not because I'm upset that Doctor Strange is dead, but because I'm interested in what comes next. And I know that eventually, at some point, Doctor Strange is coming back. That's just how it works. But with Blaze of Glory, those characters are dead. That particular interpretation of them is gone. Even when I read other comics about Kid Colt or the Rawhide Kid, they don't feel like the Blaze of Glory versions. Those characters are dead, and that adds weight and drama to a story in a way that most superhero comics just can't do.
I would argue that there's also a certain element of added danger because of the setting, don't you think? Most of y'all modern day listeners feel safe in your cozy cars and your air-conditioned houses and 40-hour-a-week jobs. But back in my day...
So you are a time traveler.
Back in the days of the Old West, I meant to say. That's what I was going to say. But then I misspoke. Back in the days of the Old West, life was a struggle. A man had to ride his horse across the land. He had to patch up his own wounds, find his own allies, fight his own demons. Sure, you might have characters like Wolverine in your fancy modern comics, but what kind of danger does he face? That guy can heal from anything. He's got it easy, if you ask me. You know, not like the real heroes like the Rawhide Kid or the Two-Gun Kid. Those were men who had to face actual problems, and there were real stakes to what was going on in their stories.
Sure, I'll give that there's some added elements to the story's setting and general lack of superpowers, but we did have some stories with super elements, like the Kid Colt and Arizona Girl one-shot, and I would argue that that story was more fun because it featured modern concepts like the Skrulls in an anachronistic setting. I'm used to reading stories about the Skrulls fighting the Avengers and whatnot, and honestly, it's just not exciting anymore. The Avengers were killing Skrulls left and right during Secret Invasion. Who cares at this point? But Kid Colt and the Arizona Girl have no superpowers, and they have almost no context for what a Skrull is or what they can do. So I think it's actually much more fascinating to see that conflict in the West than it is in the modern day.
Exactly. The less superpowers in one of these books, the better it was.
Well, that's not true. Just look at the Vegas two-parter in Amazing Fantasy. That's probably one of my favorite stories in this set of episodes. And not only does Vegas have his own superpowers, but so do all of his enemies. You can tell a good Western story with powers. You just need to make sure that there's a cost, that those powers can't just solve every problem. If you dropped a character like Superman in the Wild West, he's going to be able to shrug off bullets and outrace trains and, there would be no real threat to him. But Vegas's powers came with a cost for those around him. Or look at the lightning guy from Western Legends, the guy who had super speed. That speed has kept him alive, sure, but it's also made him a target, and it's become more of a burden in his life as it's gone on. That kind of compelling storytelling wouldn't work in a modern setting, but superpowers can be in either era. Like Six Guns, even. That's set in the modern day, but it doesn't have any superpowers in it. Powers do not inherently make a story better or worse, any more than a story being set in the West makes a story better or worse. They're a vehicle for choices, they're a vehicle for storytelling. It's just another tool in the belt of the creator to be used.
Except that setting a comic in the West does make it better.
Everyone has their own tastes. There's nothing wrong with that. I am glad that you like Westerns.
Along those lines, this was clearly a Marvel-themed set of episodes, but why didn't you mix things up a bit more? DC, after all, has a pretty long history of publishing Westerns. There's a bunch of independent comics like Six Guns or Pulp or even Scalped. Or what about the Lone Ranger? Dynamite has released a number of Lone Ranger comics, and he's a Western icon of both film and the paper screen comic books. But you totally ignored all of those.
Well, I guess I could have, taken a slice from a number of different publishers to get a more broader picture of Western comics. I actually did buy a good chunk of DC's All-Star Western, starring Jonah Hex, when it was first coming out, but the comic didn't really do much for me, and I got rid of them, and if I started to buy that again, then I would need to finish that whole volume, and that's... Oh, we all know that's dangerous territory for me. Ultimately, I think I have the same problem with this idea that I did with collecting Silver Age comics. That's just a bunch of comics that don't naturally appeal to me, and it's a lot of money to spend. I know that I'm a Marvel guy, I have said that before, and it just feels more natural for me to focus just in that direction. But you know what? I will look around and see what else is out there. Maybe I'll find a new favorite. If anyone out there has any particular Western suggestions, I would love to hear them. What about you, man? You got anything specific in mind?
Well, how about this? Out of what you read, having now adventured through a decade and a half of publication, What would you say is your favorite?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, this has been an ever-changing list the more comics that I read, so I suppose that this is a good chance to reflect. Okay, my least favorite is an easy one, and that's Two Gun Kid and the Sunset Riders. I hate to do it to a Fabian Nicieza book as much as I love everything else that I've read by him, but it's just such a sad comic. It isn't pretty to look at, it's hard to read, it's overly complicated, it's just bad. I like the scope of it. I like the character work, which doesn't surprise me. Nicieza does really good character work, but it's a muddy mess for the most part. Crawling towards the good books, I would probably put... I'm torn. It's either A Man Named Frank or Rawhide Kid Max. You know, I'm gonna say that it's Rawhide Kid Max. I really do like the way that this book explored masculinity in the Wild West and gayness and how the two ideas aren't mutually exclusive. Especially for the era that this book was published in, the fact that it is so blatantly supportive of being gay is pretty impressive. And I love John Severan's artwork. He does a great job drawing the faces in this comic. But the book is meant to be a comedy, and it's just not funny. Like, almost at all. It's really obnoxious for the most part, and a lot of the comedy is at the expense of the lead character, and in a book that is specifically rebuilding your lead character from the ground up, it's kind of frustrating for me. A Man Named Frank is definitely next, and only because it is such an uneven presentation of the Punisher. The Punisher works for me because he has nothing to live for except the mission. Killing criminals. But in A Man Named Frank, our lead character kills for money, he kills for the fun of it, and that just is not the Punisher for me. Otherwise, I do have to say that this is a solid comic book. The intensity of the Punisher character is there. The artwork is gorgeous in terms of line work. Again, this version of Frank is what I see in my head, and overall, it is a thrilling tale that comes together pretty well. But this just is not the Punisher for me. At least not for me, specifically. Is it A Man Named Frank? Yeah, sure. But it's not the Punisher. At this point in the lineup, I would say that we're into the good, flat-out comics. I do not have a lot of complaints about these books. We're crossing the comic book storytelling Rubicon, if you will. And I would probably put the Mighty Marvel Western Event comics next. And even then, I would only put them here together because they're kind of just a random assortment of comics. Not all of the stories are very well told, both the modern and the classic ones, and that's the biggest negative to them. There are a lot of stories that I really enjoyed, but I won't lie, I really do wish that there was some kind of through line for this event. I'm someone who has always liked the connective tissue of comic books and the background of Marvel comic books specifically, so making these books stand alone is a very minor negative storytelling thing for me. Plus, we've got the weird two-gun kid / She-Hulk / werewolf story. And that isn't a bad story, but I want the connective tissue to be between the Western comics, not with a random She-Hulk storyline that's not advertised or mentioned at all within the actual comic. In terms of getting me to buy more comics, which this whole event is clearly built to do, it doesn't do it at all. Rawhide Kid and the Sensational Seven would be next for me. This comic is inherently less interesting than the Rawhide Kid Max series from an intellectual perspective, as it has no deeper meaning or story concepts to explore other than the adventure. Sensational Seven is pretty much just an adventure story, pure and simple. But I gotta say that it works better because of it. It's fun, it's fast-paced, it's just a little bit stupid, but Howard Chaykin makes it look very pretty, and that stupidness does help lean into the comedy aspect of it. It works in terms of the adventure aspect better than the Rawhide Kid Max series, but it absolutely has no depth to it, and if you're looking for a little more to your story, then yeah, I would suggest you read Rawhide Kid Max. 2019's Kid Colt would probably be the next one. The structure of this book reads a little bit weird if you didn't know that it started life as a digital comic first, but the story does make sense and it fits in with Kid Colt's historic continuity, which I really like. It's dramatic and clever, and it looks pretty good. It's a solid opening punch to an ongoing series that just never came to be, which is a real shame. I do wish that there was some kind of back matter explaining where the book came from. All you would need would be like an inside cover page or like a back page being like, this is where the story came from, and then maybe you could have a little bit of commentary from Tom DeFalco or Rick Burchett or just something a little bit more, because like I said, the structure of this reads so weird when you pick up a comic book and it's got like legit chapter breaks. That's just odd. Amazing Fantasy's Vegas story is here for much the same reason, actually. Carl Kessel wrote the hell out of those 2 issues, but unfortunately, the story just never goes anywhere. Vegas has enough depth to be interesting, and he's got just enough brains to figure things out, and a pretty dangerous power that keeps him in his place. Plus, the idea of anomalitos and anomalocos in the modern Marvel West is super interesting to me. Like, there's so much there that you could explore. But, like I said, no one cared to explore any of those ideas, and that's the biggest knock that I have for Vegas. We're in the top 4 at this point, the final 4 westerns of the apocalypse, if you will. And sitting at number 4 is probably Six Guns. Six Guns has a great self-contained story. It has drama, pathos, murder, action, comedy, and some really cool, intense fight scenes. Six Guns is definitely a fave for me out of the streak and kind of like a hidden gem. I really enjoyed this one. The 80th anniversary one-shot Gunhawks would be in 3rd place for me. Because it's just so well done. It's a gorgeous comic book with beautiful coloring and a tight, easy-to-understand, tragic story. I'm a sucker for a tragic ending, and this one actually came with some redemption for its lead character. So we got character growth, too, all in one issue, and it's just so nicely done.
So we're down to the final 2. The showdown at high noon, if you will. I kind of thought we might end up with these 2 books in this spot.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that this ending isn't much of a surprise. I fell hard for Ostrander's take on the Marvel West, and I've been pretty frank about that this entire time. I loved the sense of history to these books. I loved doing the research behind each character and the historical elements that surrounded them. Blaze of Glory and Apache Skies are fairly tightly paced, they have some solid character work going on, and they're probably the most thoroughly researched out of all of the comics here, in my opinion. What this comes down to, though, what the top spot comes down to, though, is the art.
Yeah, can't have a comic without art. That goes without saying.
Ironically, these 2 books have the exact same artist on them, Leonardo Manco, so you would think that they would look similar in their execution. But Blaze of Glory is dark, muddy, and most notably, it's almost all brown. I know that the American West is a dusty place, but come on, have you seen those stone mesas? Have you seen the colors in a desert? It isn't all just dirt, mud, brown out there. There is depth and shading and life and vibrancy. And that's why the top spot for me... would you mind giving me a drum roll, man?
Oh, sure. Let me just free up a hand and...
The top spot goes to Apache Skies.
Woo! Oh, yeah!
Holy shit, dude! I have upstairs neighbors. Stop that!
That is my bad. I apologize.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I would be okay if they just kind of like died because they're loud as hell and kind of obnoxious, but I do not want to be involved in that. Like, this ain't the Wild West, man.
Yeah, sure. I should have thought of that. But I gotta say, I am surprised that Blaze of Glory got 2nd place out of those 2 books.
Look, I love Blaze of Glory. I really do. I think it's a solid story. I love the sense of history. I love the big cast of it. I love its tragic ending. But the fairly nonsensical change to Marcel Fournier still bothers me. Yeah, that's how much this continuity matters to me now. And to be honest, the book is kind of ugly. Manco does do some really great pages in the comic. Like, it's It always hurts to say that a comic book doesn't look good because there's so much in this book that does look good. And from a line work perspective, Manco does an amazing job. Again, this is a book that if it was left in black and white, I honestly think it would look better. But the coloring on Blaze of Glory is just so lackluster and so boring, and it really drags the whole book down. In the same way that Two Gun and the Sunset Riders coloring really worked against it, same thing here for Blaze of Glory. Apache Skies, on the other hand, is bright and vibrant. I like the death of the Apache Kid leading into the creation of the new Apache Kid in the form of Rosa, and then her mission leads to the saving of a bunch of literal Apache children. That's cool storytelling. The Apache Kid lives on through the very people that surrounded him. But what puts that story over the top for me, when I'm flipping through the pages of the comic, is just that I linger over Apache Skies pages more. I love the colors. I love its painted look. It is splitting hairs for me with these two books. Like, these are both my top two favorites, but if a gun is being held to me and I'm being told to choose, which is what happened, man, then that's my pick.
Oh, yeah, I do suppose I don't need these anymore.
Oh, wow, that's a Vanishing Guns. Neat. That's not what I was expecting.
Well, now that you've said your piece, I don't need those anymore. I knew that you were having trouble writing this wrap-up episode, Ben, so I figured I'd come on down and help y'all out.
You don't really have to do that. I appreciate your interest, but I'm a pretty private guy, and I would like you to respect that.
Too bad, Ben. You see,
I am a being beyond your comprehension. I am not from the American West at all. In truth, I am from a dimension beyond humanity, beyond physical form.
Oh, God!
Know that your actions here are being observed. Know that your actions here are being judged. Looking forward to the next show. Farewell! Okay. Folks, I have never regretted this show being audio only more than I regret it today. That thing, Kid Wednesday, after he made his guns vanish, he pulled off his face, and, I felt, every emotion all at once. There was, light and darkness, and, it was like I was looking through a prism, but, a tentacle prism, because, it was waving around, and it was undulating, and... Oh, God. So Westerns. I knew that I was going to find stuff that I enjoyed with these. Like, the idea of buying a smattering of comics within a genre and finding nothing but duds sounds pretty impossible to me. I'm just too easily pleased. I love comics. I want to like comics. I'm not surprised that in doing these episodes, I found a stack of good comics. What did surprise me the most, honestly, is how much I've been left wanting more. Every time Marvel releases some kind of Western project from here on out, I'm going to be there like an eager puppy. I get it. I like these characters. I like their deal. And I want more of it. I want film projects, to be quite honest. And during my research over these past couple of weeks, clearly I'm not the only one. I have seen more and more Marvel's next entry should be a Western articles popping up. And I love the fact that that's happening. That is how much that I have fallen for these ideas and characters. I want them on the big screen, baby. I won't lie, I will probably be tempted to buy the Silver Age comics for the rest of my flooping life, but that is a temptation that I think I can resist. I must resist. Next week, we'll be doing the old breakdown classic when I finish up a long streak of episodes. It's going to be a catch-up episode. We haven't gotten caught up since, March, I think it was, and it's been 20 episodes, and let's do it. I haven't finished watching Miss Marvel yet, and I haven't seen Thor: Love and Thunder yet. Maybe I will by the time this episode posts, but I haven't as of the writing and recording of it. But I would like to record an episode about that. We we just had the Hall H announcements about all the upcoming MCU projects. That stuff was crazy. I don't know if that's going to be a bonus episode or a regular episode, but I'll figure it out. After that, I've got a few ideas about what I want to explore next, but I haven't really settled on anything specific. I know what I want the next big project to be, but we just finished this pretty long Western series, so I don't want to hop into a long-form set of episodes again quite yet. We'll probably do a few smaller episodes, like maybe a month's worth, just cover a couple miniseries or something like that, and then we'll get into the big one. So expect vagueness over the next few weeks, I guess. Next week, just chatting. The week after, maybe an MCU episode. The week after that, we'll start something new. Thanks for listening to me ramble through the Wild West, y'all. This has been a blast. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 19.20, Circling the Wagons. The music you heard in this episode during Kid Wednesday's big departure is copyright and royalty-free music from the artist Ross Bugden. I found this music on YouTube, and it was really cool. Like, I knew I wanted some kind of, like, orchestral music or, like, chanting Latin, like, big... Like, I wanted it to be like an angel was descending from heaven kind of thing, and this music was perfect. I just wanted to make sure I got credit to him. I will have links to his YouTube in the description of this episode, both for the podcast and for YouTube. So if you like the music, please check him out. It's really cool stuff. All right, let me get out of here.